Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. As I'd mentioned, literally from the very time of his appearance, there were indications and later manifestations of his extraordinariness. Literally from the beginning, from his appearance, means that he appeared with the umbilical cord wrapped around his body like the thread that is worn by upper caste men in Vedic society. So that is awarded at the time of Upanayanam, or when the Vedic study is to begin. So his Vedic study began from the very beginning of life. And it also means that one becomes a disciple. So he appeared, the Upanayanam, or the investiture of the sacred thread. That means one becomes a disciple and studies the Vedas. So practically, although he was known as the son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he never saw himself in the relationship of a son to father, but he always adopted the role of a disciple in relationship to a guru. So that was the beginning. There's so many extraordinary things. Of course, in the lives of many sadhus, there are extraordinary happenings. And sometimes people think that is the symptom of being a sadhu. Something unusual happens. Kuch chamatkar dekhao. Show us. They expect the sadhus to show some miracles. Something amazing. But the main symptom of a great devotee is that he loves Krishna, which is extraordinary in this world. And extraordinary things often occur in the lives of such devotees. Sometimes such things are made up about sadhus or exaggerated. But in the case of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, for a start, he wasn't interested in making up stories about himself. But these all actually happened. Sometimes we see that someone will claim they're born in a very pious family, which means that their family members went to church or something in between eating meat 3 times a day. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur actually appeared in the most pious possible family, in the family of a great acharya. But that is not the main symptom of a great acharya. A great acharya may appear in an impious family, although generally they will appear in a pious family. Or it may be that someone's born in a very pious family, and they themselves are very impious. So we can't judge who is a great devotee simply by their birth. We have to see the symptoms also. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur appeared in the best possible family, in the family of a Vaishnava Acharya, whose activities and realizations are inimitable. You can't just imitate Bhaktivinoda Thakur. You may think he wrote so many poems, okay, I'll write so many poems, but he won't have the same quality. Just like there was one king of Orissa, who was that? Padmanabha Dev, Ramachandra Dev, one of them. seeing that the Gita Govinda of Jayadev Goswami was so much appreciated, he thought, well, I'll write one too. And he wrote the Abhinav Gita Govinda, the new Gita Govinda. And he thought, well, this is better than the original. And his ministers said, well, not really. So he thought it was. So they placed a manuscript of the original Gita Govinda at night before Jagannath with the manuscript of the Abhinav Gita Govinda. And in the morning, the manuscript of the Gita Govinda original was still intact, but the other one was just scattered here and there, like Jagannath had thrown it away. So then the king, who was also a devotee, was that? I can't remember the name. Maybe it was the father of Prataparudra. There was several famous Vaishnava kings in that line. Padmanabhadev, Ramachandradev, Mukundadev. So you can't just imitate. You can try, but there's no use to imitate. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he wasn't imitating. He was a great devotee of the highest caliber. So from the very beginning, from the moment he appeared from his mother's womb, they're all symptoms of a great devotee. He was also appeared in Puri, which that's also very auspicious. Of course, not everyone who's born in Puri is a great acharya, but it's a very auspicious birth. Everyone in Puri, the demigod sees as having 4 hands. Puri is none different from Vaikuntha, Bhu-Vaikuntha. Several places are called that. But again, it's not the birth in a place which is the most special thing. Srila Prabhupada appeared in Calcutta, which Gorky Shaw called hell. That was before, that was a long time ago. But it's become more hellish since then, no doubt. Things are getting worse in Kali Yuga, not better, day by day. So that's not the main criterion, but still, Hyutkale Purushottamat, that is stated that the four Vaishnava Sampradayas, they will purify the earth from Purushottam Kshetra, Jagannath Puri, in Udkal, which means what we nowadays call Orissa, or particularly South Orissa, and Kalinga is the north part, and now it's called Odisha. So he appeared, and from the beginning the sign was there. Then at 6 months old, when it was Rath Yatra of Jagannath, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had rented a house on what is called the Grand Road in Puri, the road from the Sri Mandir, the Jagannath Mandir, to the Gundicha Ghar, as it's often called. They don't call Gundicha Mandir because they say there's not regular worship there, so they call it the place of Gundicha. Or actually they mostly call it Mashiyabari in Puri. So it's the road on which the Rath Yatra goes. The Rath goes, Jagannath goes on Yatra, and sometimes we see in the history that sometimes Jagannath just decides to stop and not move. That happened in the case of Caitanya Mahaprabhu. That happened in the case of Rasikananda, because he wasn't there. He was late reaching Puri. And that also happened with Shalabeg, 3 months in the case of Shalabeg. He was coming from Vrindavan to Puri, and he arrived 3 months late. And Jagannath didn't move all that time, as far as I remember. Was it 3 months or 3 weeks? It was a long time anyway. So 3 days, Jagannath stopped outside the house that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had rented in Puri, which is now, that property has been acquired. That was acquired by Sripad Madhava, Bhaktidayata Madhav Maharaj, and a beautiful temple has been constructed at that site, which few of us stayed there just a few days ago. So Jagannath stopped there for 3 days. Bhaktivinoda Thakur organized a Sankirtan festival non-stop. He said, okay, Jagannath stopped, let's have Sankirtan for him, as long as he stops. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur's wife, his second wife, Bhagavati Devi, is also a great pure devotee. She brought the boy, who was named Bimala Prasad. There's so many things to say, there's no time to say everything. Bimala is the name of the Shakti of Jagannath, who resides with Jagannath in the Jagannath Mandir. She is one of the forms of Shakti at the 64 Shakti Pitams throughout India, where Kali's body was split up into 64 pieces and then remanifested in different forms. So she is the Shakti manifesting here. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he named his sons after what appears to be various names of Durga, although they can be understood in more specifically Vaishnava context also. So his sons were named Anada Prasad, Kamala Prasad, Bimala Prasad, Lalita Prasad, so like this. So the boy Bimala, or Bimu as he was known, or Noida, there are different nicknames given to him. His mother brought him onto the Rath to place him at the lotus feet of Jagannath, and immediately a garland fell down and encircled the body of the child, which is another indication that this was a special boy. Or even before that, one astrologer, naturally an astrologer is called to make the chart in any high-class family. And he said that I've made many charts, but I've never seen any which has all these symptoms of an auspicious character. He's everything in his chart, his bodily symptoms. The astrologer said that he has all the bodily symptoms of a great personality, as described in the Samudrika, which is a section of Garuda Purana, which deals with such things. So he was on this very auspicious happening that Jagannath gave his blessing. That's understood. That if the deity gives the garland, that means the blessings. So he's accepted, and the Annaprashana, the first giving of grains to the baby, was conducted on Jagannath's cart with Jagannath. I'm not sure. No, was it on the cart? I doubt that. But it was conducted at that time with Jagannath Prasadam. So there are signs that he's a great person. Even in childhood. At approximately 4 years of age, his father returned home bringing some mangoes, and he set them aside, and the boy, this young boy, Bimala, took a mango for eating. Seeing that, his father reprimanded him. He's only a little boy, but so he didn't get very angry with him, we can presume. But he reprimanded him because he has to be trained, the boy has to be trained. So he said that, no, don't take that mango. First we have to offer to Giridhari. Giridhari was being worshipped, Govardhan Shila. by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He said, first everything has to be offered to Krishna, then only you can take. So this young boy, child, he reproved himself. I've made a great offense that I wanted to eat something which was not offered to the Lord. And he took a vow on the spot that he would never eat mangoes again in his life, which is quite a vow to take. Mangoes being the king of fruits. There's no fruit as nice as mangoes used to be, because in the last 2-3 years they don't seem, like everything else, they don't seem to have any good flavor. At least last few years I didn't taste any mangoes. Maybe the changing of seasons and this and that. But it used to be a great treat to eat mangoes. Nowadays, that's gone. But now you can imagine, those of you who have children especially, you know, that if a little boy, 4 years old, if he takes something and you take it away from him, what does he do? He starts screaming and yelling and crying. What about you, Kunja? And the mother has to come and pacify him. A child doesn't say things. A child of that age doesn't say, "Oh, I've committed a great offense." It seems he never had childlike consciousness. He was so adult in his out, more than adult. He was ati marcha. He was beyond the human platform. It's a minor thing, you could say. I mean, for a child, there's no offense at that age. Of course, the way things are going, there may be soon gangs of 4 years old going around stabbing people, but it hasn't happened yet. Or there are gangs of 8 years old doing that, but not 4 years old children. So, he was so intelligent that by the age of 7 he'd memorized the whole Bhagavad Gita, and could not only memorize the verses, but he could explain them and comment on them. Bhaktivinoda Thakur took him under his wing. He would take him to various religious meetings. He trained him from the very beginning as a Vaishnava, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur had been praying that Bhaktivinoda Thakur thought that there's so much work to do in spreading Krishna consciousness in the world, but he thought about himself that ekaki ama nahi pai bol hari nama sankitane tumi kripa kori shodha bindu diya deha Krishna namadhana. He thought about himself that alone I have no power for chanting and propagating the holy name. So he prayed that a person could appear in this world to take forward the work of propagating Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada commented about this, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself was fully capable of delivering the world, but he, in humility, prayed like that. Plus, there's also the factor that every acharya, no acharya does everything. Even Caitanya Mahaprabhu himself didn't do everything. He leaves work, he leaves service for future generations. Similarly, Advaita Acharya, he himself could deliver the whole world, but he prayed that Krishna come. Krishna came as Caitanya Mahaprabhu. So, Bhaktivinoda Thakur gradually recognized that this child was the answer to his prayers. At the age of 7, he was Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when the foundations for the house that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was building in Calcutta, during the digging of the foundations, a Kurma Shila, Shalagram Shila with the characteristics of Kurma Dev was unearthed. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave that worship. That means he gave mantras for worship. That means he gave initiation to Bimala, and also gave him the Nrsimha, what is that? Nrsimha Raja Maha Mantra. He gave that to him also. And he also had beads, Tulsi beads brought from Puri for him to start chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So this practically signified his formal induction into Vaishnavism. In youth, in childhood, he was a prodigy. He was extremely intelligent. He studied far above the level of everyone else of his age, although he didn't study the subjects at school. He would go to school and he would bring with him books like Prarthana and Prema Bhakti Chandrika of Narottam Das. And he would hold his books open, and inside the book he would have these songs of Narottam, and he wouldn't bother studying all the stuff. Although anyway, he just passed anyway, because he was Shrutidha. One time he heard something, he knew it. That's all. So sometimes he got chastised at school and even at home by some of his relatives when he's supposed to be studying the school books and doing homework. He had no interest in these things. He was only interested in Krishna consciousness. But he did, in childhood and youth, take a keen interest in Jyotish, which means nowadays when we say Jyotish, we mostly think of astrology. And even when we think of astrology, what is practiced by most astrologers in India is only a very small part of the whole science of astrology. Astrology was formally practiced not just for arranging marriages, that seems to be the main use nowadays, and when to open a business and all this kind of thing. Solving problems, but it was for ascertaining the best times for performing yagyas. That was, and for all when to sow crops and daily life. What is the inauspicious period in the day? What is the inauspicious period? Every day the astrologer would be giving advice like this. So, but Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he knew all that, but his main interest was in what in English we would call astronomy, which is the basis of astrology. So he took an interest in that, and he very soon, that also to study astronomy requires excellent brain power, because conceptually it's not very easy. One has to have knowledge of advanced knowledge of mathematics. In those days, and even when I was a child, any calculations, you had to do it yourself. There's no computer to do it for you. Computers actually make people more stupid, because they can't even do a simple calculation. Multiply 1728 by 64, for instance. What's that? 1728 by 64. 1728 is the number of words in one round of of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, and 64 is the number of rounds we're supposed to chant minimally every day. So he was in his childhood. He took this up. He took great interest in this. in the Vedic science of Jyotish, and he soon noted that what are called the astronomical constants were way out, which rendered all the calculations wrong. Astronomical constants means they're given to calculate the expected positions of the planets and the heavenly bodies according to their observed motion, but the constants are not so very constant, because it's not exactly clockwork, and so according to the observed motion of the planets, these constants have to be revised every few years. It hadn't been done for 1,000 years, which meant that all the astrological advice that was being given was off. So he did that, which is, again, it's not just some baby task. That it's a tremendous task to do that. His doing so met with opposition from the orthodoxy of astrology, because they say the idea is that, well, this is given by our predecessors, and you can't just change something given up by our predecessors. The idea in all aspects of Vedic culture that we have to follow the predecessors. You can't just invent something. But in this case, the proper following of the predecessors would be to recalculate the constants, because it doesn't make any sense to in the name of following the predecessors, to use tables that are defunct, they're out of date. So he met with much opposition for doing this, and that was his life. Giving the proper understanding in opposition to persons who thought that because they were in the orthodoxy that they had it right. But when the orthodoxy becomes unorthodox, then we shouldn't follow it, just like we follow tradition. Aitihya, or in Bengali, aitijya. We follow tradition. Mahajano yena gata sapantha. We follow what the great personalities do, and that is in every sphere of Vedic culture, in dance, in drama, in temple construction, in cooking, in everything. But when the tradition itself becomes disassociated from the reality that it's supposed to convey, then the orthodoxy, instead of preserving the Vedyam Vastavam, the actual object of knowledge, then it instead obfuscates it. So reform is required in society, because even for that which is considered most ancient and best, because at some point, and especially in Kali Yuga, what happens is, by the mighty influence of time, sakale neha mahata yoga nashta parantapa, by the mighty influence of time, that which is supposed to be correct and representing the truth is not. So it makes a little change here, a little change there, a little change here, a little change there, and then the whole thing goes awry. Or in this case, because they didn't change it, it was required to change it, but because it wasn't changed, then it became unusable, or usable, but would give the wrong result. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he spent his whole life fighting with people who thought themselves to be authorities, but they were not. He was the actual authority. So in his early life, he was very early, in his teens, in his teenage years, when he was aged about 14 or 15, he was awarded the title Siddhanta Saraswati by who was supposed to be his teachers in astronomy. But actually they understood that he is more qualified than we. So Saraswati is a name which is given to, or a title that's given to anyone who's very learned in any branch of Vedic knowledge. It's a common title for sannyasis, often Mayavadi sannyasis, and Siddhanta, because his specialty was in Siddhanta. Siddhanta means in Darshan Shastra, in philosophical discussion, Siddhanta means the conclusion. So each school has its conclusion. Therefore we speak of Gauriya Siddhanta, Madhva Siddhanta, Nimbarka Siddhanta, Advaita Siddhanta. In Jyotish, astronomy, astrology, the term Siddhanta means to the proper understanding of the various subjects of that science. So from an early age, in his teens, he started translating important books of Jyotish from Sanskrit to Bengali. So for all these contributions to astronomy, he was known as Siddhanta Saraswati. Later he became known as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. That the real Siddhanta is Bhakti. And so his name signifies that the Siddhanta is Bhakti. The ultimate conclusion of all intellectual endeavors is Bhakti. And also, how is Bhakti to be understood? He gave the Siddhanta on that also. So both ways he should be understood as Bhakti Siddhanta. And Saraswati. Saraswati, means the goddess of learning. So, what is learning? That is stated in Shastra, that there are two kinds of learning. One is called Paravidya and the other is called Aparavidya. Paravidya means transcendental knowledge, and Aparavidya means topics of this material world, as presented in the Vedas. And what is outside Vedas, that's avidya. So it's also vidya, what is given in the Vedas. Subjects like Jyotish, astronomy, astrology. There are the Vedangas, 6 Vedangas. One of them is astrology. So, and there are many other topics also. The Upavedas includes Ayurveda, and there are so many topics. But so that is presided over. These Aparavidya is presided over by Dushta Saraswati, or the material, or the expansion of Saraswati of the spiritual world, who oversees material knowledge, and Shuddha Saraswati is the Saraswati of the spiritual world, whom Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is non-different from. He is the manifestation of this name. Saraswati is applied. Anyone who speaks or who gives knowledge, who especially beautiful poetry, Jayadeva Saraswatim. Jayadev describes himself as Saraswati with the understanding that Saraswati is speaking through you, through him. Such persons are inspired by, and their words, the understanding is that their words are not their own words. Their words are as good as the Vedas. They are manifested by Saraswati. Vagisha yasya vadane. She is in the mouth, in the words. Saraswati, Vagisha, the goddess of words, she is in the mouth of Nrsimha. Therefore, there's typical kind of thing that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would say things which just amazing things. Maybe I'll get back to that later. So he opened one lecture by speaking about Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye, from the first verse of Bhagavatam, that Krishna imparted the Vedic knowledge into the heart of Brahma. So Saraswati Thakur said, this is Nrsimha Leela. Why is, I presume that's from Vagisha Yasya Vadane Lakshmi Yasya Cha Vakshasi Yaste Hridaye Sangvit Tang Nrsimha Maham Bhaje. A well-known pranam mantra to Nrsimha Dev, which is said that Saraswati Vagisha is in his mouth. Lakshmi is on his chest. Samvit, the potency Samvit, is within him. I offer my obeisance to that Nrsimha. So he's known as. Can you make a note of that? SB 111 Nrsimha Leela Vagisha Yasya Vadane. I don't know if I made that point in Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhav, which I've just been revising a little bit recently. There's so many points. So yeah, at a young age he was a prodigy, which means in youth he showed in childhood and youth he showed extraordinary ability. But what often happens with prodigies is that when they grow up, obviously they're not prodigies anymore, but they just become someone else. That means if at the age of, say for instance at the age of 5, someone plays a musical instrument at the level of a master, of an adult master, he may be called a prodigy, violin prodigy. But then when he's 25 and he's still playing at the same level, then he's a master, but he's not super special, because he's doing what other masters do at the same age. So it may be that it's often that prodigies, when they grow up, they remain very special, but special among other specials. But in the case of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his whole life was just one amazing thing after another. And yeah, every lecture he gave was just opening up new revelations, new doors into the spiritual world, new understandings of, not new, from our perspective, new. We think if we can learn half a dozen Gita shlokas, we're doing well, but Shastra was just at the tip of his tongue. Just all Shastras he would speak. Modern knowledge he was fully versed in. Fully, there's no full. There's no end. But he was versed in Shastra, in the knowledge of the Western world, the history, so many things. And his insights were extraordinary. So he was a prodigy, and he later just his whole life was, again, something of amazing, just simply amazing. So he went to college. He was, as it was expected. He went to college, but he quit it early. In those days, no one quit college. It just wasn't done. Or there might be some cases, it was a little early for that. There might be, a little later there were people who quit college for political reasons. Or they were thrown out of college. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was thrown out of college for his political activities. But even in India today, it's unusual that people just leave because they just don't want to do the college. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he left without getting qualification because he thought that, well, if I'm from a respectable family, and if I have a good degree from the college, I'll be a hot target for parents wanting to get their daughters married. So forget it. From an early age, he formed an association called the what is that called? Chirakuma Sabha, lifelong brahmacharis. So he got some of his school friends together and said, okay, let's all be brahmacharis all our life. So he said, yeah, okay, great. And he was the only one who did it. He was determined from the very beginning not to enter family life, even from his early youth. And he quit college. We can imagine what kind of protest there must have been from his relatives for quitting college. There's so many things. I have to go back to the... So he quit college. This was in 1895. He was 21, but he got employment by the kings of Tripura. There was one king of Tripura and then another one. Shortly after he was appointed, that king died. Then another. He entered the service of the royalty of Tripura, whose office, and they had a palace in Calcutta. Nowadays, when you think of Tripura, you think, whoa, it's way, way over there, on the other side of Bangladesh. And to go there, if you go by road, you have to go all around. But in those days, it was in the eastern tip of Bengal, which was united. Bengal wasn't... it wasn't separate. East Bengal wasn't a separate country. So there were several kings. The Raja of Tripura, which was considered, Bengal, almost. It's Bengali culture. But it's a separate, traditionally it's a separate area from Bengal. But culturally, very much the same. Well, it was Bengalis living there, along with the indigenous people. And there's the Raja of Kuch Bihar, Bardhaman, Kashim Bazar. So they'd all have their houses and they're in Calcutta. So he was serving and living in Calcutta. One of his elder brothers, Kamala Prasad, got him that job. So he was very happy with that job because the Maharaj of Tripura had a huge library. So he spent a lot of time just going through the library. He was really into books. He was very much into knowledge. After some time, he left that service. He said, I just want to do some job just to maintain myself, because in an honest way. At this time, it seems he was not ready to preach widely. He was 10 years, aged 21 to 31, in the service of the kings of Tripura. He was an extremely principled person. So when he found corruption in the offices of the Maharaj of Tripura, he unearthed that, for which he understandably became unpopular. The Maharaj of Tripura appreciated. But then he quit that. After 10 years, he quit that. He thought it just wasn't his thing. to be involved with all these materialistic people. The Maharaj of Tripura was so grateful to him that he gave him a lifelong pension, even though he'd only done 10 years' work. But he'd saved so much money by uncovering and not allowing anyone to be corrupt. So then he started the Saraswat Chatushpati, an academy of astronomy in Calcutta. Previously, of course, it would only be Brahmins who would study. But he was from a non-Brahmin family and he was teaching. But many people came to him, even some of his former professors came to him and studied from him. Previously, everyone from Bengal who wanted to study this would go to Varanasi, cultural center. Just like today, still Brahmins, they go to Varanasi to study, and many come to Vrindavan to study. These are places there was no such place in Bengal, although Navadvip formerly had been a center of study, but it had declined. And it was never a place of study of astronomy anyway. So he taught, and he began observing Chaturmasya. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very strict. Jagannath Das Babaji, he gave the idea, come on, we should all observe Chaturmas. Why aren't we doing? It's not just for the karmis. Generally it was thought that Chaturmas was observed by materialistic people, for materialistic benefits. But Jagannath Das Babaji said, no, the Vaishnavas, they should observe it also. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur took that up very seriously. And Siddhanta Saraswati also took that up. And when he took anything up, he took it up very seriously. He wasn't half-hearted about anything. He took it up in full strictness. During this period, he was writing, editing Bhaktivinoda Thakur's writings. Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave his writings to him to edit. That's a very significant point, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had so many sons, 13 children, mostly sons. But he gave his writings to Siddhanta Saraswati, Bimala Prasad, to edit. So he's writing articles, editing. In early 1900, he was initiated by Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. This is something also quite extraordinary, that someone who had such a reputation for being so learned and so sophisticated, coming from a family that his father was a highly respected government officer, magistrate of the British. When we say magistrate, we often think of a judicial officer, which he was, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but he had other high administrative duties. In fact, in his old age, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he met one of the British superiors who had been overseeing him, it means in the administrative service, that British man told him that if you had not been Indian, we would have promoted you up further and further and further. But we couldn't promote you any further because you're an Indian. We can't put Indians in higher positions than this. We can't admit that Indians are capable of doing work at such a high level. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur was surprised that he was grateful that he admitted it, but at the same time he was surprised that they could have such an envious spirit when he was serving the British government in a completely selfless and dedicated way. Not that he was trying for his own aggrandizement. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur obviously was very respectable, and his son was very respectable. He was respectable and respected, very learned, very sophisticated. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur told him to take initiation from Gaura Das Babaji Maharaj. Although Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself had already given him mantra initiation, and Siddhanta Saraswati was already wearing a thread even before initiation. Exactly when and how he got that is not clear. There are some points which are not clear. So, how he took initiation from Gaura Kishore? He sent him to Kulia. Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj was residing in Kulia. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had his house in Calcutta, and he'd built another house in Godrumadweep. It's what's now called Swarupganj. He first had a property at Surabi Kunj, and then he relocated to Swananda Sukhada Kunja. There are so many things to say. I didn't translate everything and put everything in that Bhaktisiddhanta. There's many things about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, very sweet narrations about Bhaktivinoda Thakur. How at Swananda Sukhada Kunja, there'd be a small group of devotees, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he wouldn't allow any worldly talk. He was very strict. Sometimes devotees have this idea, well, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati is very strict and Bhaktivinoda was very lenient, so we'll follow Bhaktivinoda. But he was very strict. He wouldn't allow any worldly talk. There were a few who would gather there for, in the app they'd have a daily program. Of course they weren't doing this all the time, but when they went there they'd do this. And Jagadish, Bhakti Pradeep would be there. He gave these memories. Bhaktivinoda Thakur would be there. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur would have Siddhanta Saraswati read Caitanya Charitamrita. Part means you just read the verses. And time to time, Bhaktivinoda Thakur would intersperse some comments. And at time to time, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, being overwhelmed by the sweetness of Sri Caitanya Charitamrita, would stand up and just start dancing in ecstasy. Just stira hoite na pare charan. He describes the effect of the holy name on him. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that I just can't keep my legs still. So automatically dancing in ecstasy. So he sent Siddhanta Saraswati to Kulia for initiation. And Gaura Kishore refused. So again, Siddhanta Saraswati went, said, I have to take initiation from him. He's begging him for initiation. And Gaura Kishore said that, well, I'll ask Mahaprabhu. You come back after some time, I'll ask Mahaprabhu. So, after some time he again came back and said, well, what did Mahaprabhu say? And Gaura Kishore said, I forgot to ask. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati became very upset because he had the order of his guru, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, to accept initiation. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was his guru, and so he taught him everything. So then he thought of the Goshti Purna. It was similar to Goshti Purna, who 17 times refused Ramanuja initiation. Ramanuja would have to walk each time. This time Ramanuja was living where? Kanchi. And Goshti Purna was living further south. I don't remember the name of the place. So he'd walk. And Goshtipurna to tell him, no, sorry, I can't give you. Goshtipurna was theoretically from a lower caste, Ramanuja from Brahma. So on the 18th occasion, he agreed. So Siddhanta Saraswati said that he said this from Bhaktivinoda's song, Karuna na hoile, kandiya, pranana rakiboa. If you don't give me your mercy, then weeping and weeping I will not be able to maintain my life. So then seeing his commitment, he was actually crying, this staunch debater, he was this heavy person, he was crying, he was literally crying for the mercy of Gaura Kishore. So Gaura Kishore gave him some dust from Navadip Dham, put it in his hand, and told him to chant the Hare Krishna mantra. And that Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur accepted that as being Bhagavati Diksha, that which is immediate initiation into the highest level of devotional service. That can take place between Mahabhagavats. So there's so many important points here about his initiation. This is in January 1900. Yeah, Babaji Maharaj told Siddhanta Saraswati to bathe in the nearby Saraswati river, Jalangi river, and then he gave him initiation. Siddhanta Saraswati later reflected on this incident. When out of false ego, I was thinking, of course, when a great devotee says, I was suffering from false ego, we understand he wasn't suffering from false ego. So he wrote, when out of false ego, I was thinking, I am a great scholar of mathematics and philosophy. Let any big pundit come at any time, day or night, and I will cut his propositions to pieces. At that time I got the darshan of the lotus feet of Sri Guru Dev. He ignored everything that was previously appreciated in me. My truthfulness. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was highly appreciated and respected for his truthfulness. And he goes on, my moral and pious life and my intellectualism. He ignored all of that, knowing them to be of little value. So Gaura Kishore, he didn't care. He didn't care for people who are very rich and well known in society, but he didn't even care for Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was so moral and truthful and pious. He didn't care for that either. Neither did he care for the materialism of materialistic people, and neither did he care for the piety and morality of pious and moral people. When I saw that he ignored whatever was good in me, in other words, Saraswati Thakur is saying that, I have this very principled life. It's very, very principled. But Gaura Kishore doesn't think that's of any value whatsoever. He doesn't ascribe any importance to that. So when I saw that he ignored whatever was good in me, I realized how good he himself must be who could neglect so many so-called good qualities in me. So when he sees me pious, moral, learned, principled, and he doesn't think that's important, then what is it about him? What level is he at that he can think of all this as insignificant? What inconceivable wealth he possessed. This Gaura Kishore, so Siddhanta Saraswati is describing that what Siddhanta Saraswati understood that Gaura Kishore wanted Siddhanta Saraswati to realize before he could become a disciple. If he was thinking, well, I'm very learned, I'm very pious, I'm very good, I'm this, I'm that, I'm blah, 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 then he can't become a disciple. if you think you've already got everything, then what are you going to get by becoming a disciple? Being neglected by him, I understood there was no one more fallen and contemptible than myself. That was my actual identity. The very things that I had judged desiderata, which means desirable things, such as scholarship and upright character, this exalted soul regarded as valueless. I apprehended that within himself this noble personality possessed priceless treasure. I then pondered that either he is extremely puffed up or is exceedingly merciful. I then haughtily said to my Gurudev, you are a worshipper of that cheater and debauched Krishna, so why should you be compassionate to someone like me, dedicated to ordinary morality? Humbly and sincerely I prayed to the Supreme Lord for his mercy, for Krishna's mercy. Later, by his grace, Krishna's grace, I recognized that without receiving the blessings of this peerless saint and without serving him, nothing good could happen to me. So he's pious, he's learned, he's principled, he's truthful, he's been trained by a great Vaishnava Acharya. But there could be nothing auspicious in his life unless he got the mercy of Gaura Kishore. He came to understand. When I accepted that and acted accordingly, and then received the causeless unlimited grace of my Sri Gurudev and refuge at his lotus feet, I deemed my life fulfilled. I had considered my Gurudev to be unequaled in vairagya, but somewhat short of learning. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself was so learned, and Gaura Kishore was not known as a learned person. He was revered as a highly advanced devotee, but not as a very learned person. But, Siddhanta Saraswati continued, he reduced to powder my audacity born of book learning. With the mallet of his mercy, he revealed that whatever I had adjudged to be the highest ideal was in fact most low and despicable. When by his grace that instruction first entered my ears, my diminutive brain lacked the capacity to accommodate such transcendental knowledge. So he's speaking about his brain, which is huge, his mental capacity, which is huge. But he says it's far too small to understand what Gaura Kishore had to teach me. This is Bhagavati Diksha. It's very good for us to hear about and contemplate the lives of the Acharyas, just to help us understand how completely insignificant and useless we are, and how we're totally dependent on their mercy. My diminutive brain lacked the capacity to accommodate such transcendental knowledge, but to all fools like me, he gave the chance to hear such lofty topics. On receiving a jerk of the lotus feet of... I don't know. There's so many things to say. Not much to... Anyway, you can read all of them. I just want to go through some of the main incidents of his... So he was publishing artists. He wrote the book Bangay Samajikata, an analysis of different religious groups in Bengal. He accompanied Bhaktivinoda Thakur in March 1901 to Puri. He spent much time there over the next few years in deep study and bhajan. Also in Puri he was he took umbrage at the prominent Sahajya group, who was highly respected, who would chant Nitai Gaur Radhe Sham, etc. In some ways you could say they were a precursor to the Gauriya Math. It was founded by, that group was founded by an ecstatic, mystic Vaishnava from a learned background, from an aristocratic background. He attracted to him many learned or Bhadralok people who, children of the Bhadralok, like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. They were British educated, modern, high-class people, Bengalis. He attracted many to him. They revived Vaishnavism in many ways, but they were bogus. I won't get into it here and now, why they're bogus. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was very much opposed to them. The public couldn't understand why he was so much opposed to them, and the public opinion went against Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who was sent by Bhaktivinoda Thakur to oversee the affairs at the Jogpit, which the temple had been established at the birthplace of Caitanya Mahaprabhu in Mayapur, but there was no one to properly oversee it, and the affairs were in a shambles. So you could say to get him out of Puri, because the situation was becoming tense. There was talks that some people wanted to kill Siddhanta Saraswati for his very strong opposition. He would catch people on the street and say, "Do you know this? Nidai Gaura Sham is all bogus." So he sent him to oversee the affairs at Jogpit. Prior to that, he went on a tour of South India, visiting holy places, meeting scholars and religious personalities, and conducting research. Particularly significant was his exposure at this time to the Ramanuja Sampradaya, and he adopted the sannyas, the principles of sannyas from the Ramanuja Sampradaya. He also, Bhaktivinoda Thakur and later Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they brought to the attention of learned Bengalis practically the existence of and the teachings of the two prominent South Indian Vaishnava Sampradayas, the Ramanuja Sampradaya and the Madhva Sampradaya. So there are just so many things about him, he did so many vital activities in Krishna consciousness. I haven't even got to the press and these books, and it's just so much about him. So he went to Mayapur and he oversaw the affairs at Jogpit, and when he completed there over 9 years the Shatakoti Namajagya, the chanting of 100, that's 1,000 million, 1 billion names of the Mahamantra. A billion names. That means chanting 3 times 64 rounds every day for more than 9 years. He vowed. Why he undertook this? Well, there may be various reasons. One time while living at Mayapur, he was invited to a Vaishnav Sammelani, Vaishnav convention, by the Maharaj of Koshim Bajar, who was known as a great supporter of Vaishnavism, but he was under the control of these Kasko Swamis and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He went there, but he was already... Oh, wait a minute, we have to go back. He was already known as a... no, I won't go back. He was already known as an enemy of the Vaishnava orthodoxy. He was so strong against them for the cheating in the name of Vaishnavism. So he went there at the request of the Maharaj of Koshim Bazaar, but he wanted an opportunity to speak, and the people there, they did not want him to speak. So he went there with the idea that all these bogus people are all assembled together, and I'm going to tell them that they're all bogus, and why they're bogus, and why they should change. But they didn't want him to speak. So he didn't eat. The Maharaj would send him so much prasad every day. He would take a tulsi leaf. And then the Maharaj was very upset. Why didn't you eat? He said, it's not prasad. I can't eat prasad. It was all offered to Krishna. He said, no, that's not, food not cooked by a Vaishnava is not accepted. But they were all Vaishnava, they were all initiated. He didn't accept them as Vaishnavas that he could take food from. So eventually they said, okay, well, you can speak for 10 minutes on the topic of Navadvip's Maitri Mandir, a topic of a Durga temple in Navadvip. It's just nothing of, you can speak on this topic only. But even then when he started to speak, they stopped him after a few minutes. They shouted him down. So then he just left without telling the Maharaj, who was extremely upset. I invited him, he's a sadhu, and he didn't eat anything, and then he just left in disgust. So he took a train and walked back to Mayapur. Nowadays there are all facilities at Mayapur. He had to walk over the rice fields and there's all jungle and this and that. And at that time there was still jungle there and the tigers would be heard. And so he went back. But one significant thing was that attending that Samilani was one Ananta Boshu from East Bengal, who later became Ananta Vasudev, who was a major figure in the pastimes of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The major figures during his pastimes were Kunja Bihari, Ananta Vasudev, Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha Maharaj. These two, Kunja, Ananta Vasudev, Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha, Sundarananda Vidya Vinod, and then there are others. I mean, just tremendous personalities. Whatever happened later happened. Who is to say? What? Why? But these Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, then Siddhanti Maharaj, he was Swarup, what was his name? Can't remember his brahmachari name. Pranavananda, later became Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj. Madhav Maharaj, Hayagriva Brahmachari, Bharati Maharaj, Narayan Das, Bhakti Shuddhaka, Professor Nishikant Sanyal. These were all just tremendous personalities. He gathered around him. And he gathered around him means that persons of highly idealistic people and people. I mean, anyone who could come and live with him had to be a great personality because he wasn't easy to live with. He wanted a very high level of dedication to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada said, I'm 80% more lenient than my Guru Maharaj. Srila Prabhupada was very lenient. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, lenience wasn't one of his qualities. He was very, very strict. So, for anyone to come, they had to be idealistic. There were some cases also, he was very lenient with Paramananda. Anyway, you can read it. If you want, you can read all of this. But he brought persons of his speaking in that manner is very difficult for people to understand, but people are impressed that there's something very high, very, very vital, essential here. Sridhar Maharaj said that when he first visited Gauriya Math, he found there discussions of the Upanishads going on. And who discusses the Upanishads in Calcutta? Nowadays you'll find so many different, in all the cities you'll find all kinds of religious groups. In every Indian city there's a center of the Brahma Kumaris, for instance. And but there religious instruction, especially on the level of the Upanishads, that wouldn't go on in Calcutta. Calcutta was a city developed as a commercial city. That's why they'd go from Calcutta to Varanasi for training in Jyotish. because there were places for that, and Calcutta was not a place for discussing. It's not done in Calcutta. Then you have to, if you want some spiritual instruction, you have to go to a spiritual place. But Sridhar Maharaj was impressed that this discussion, this level of discussion is going on in Calcutta. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur attracted to him. He just drew around him people of very high qualification, very high ideals. They were attracted to him, and he built them up by his association also. So he was living in Mayapur, then he undertook this vow, thinking that Gaura Das Babaji Maharaj had told him to preach the message of Shat Shandarbha, leaving aside all other works. Preach the message of the absolute truth. So he had this order, but then he saw he's preaching, and what's the result of preaching? People just reject him. So he thought, okay, I'll just sit in Mayapur and chant. That's all. And he oversaw the affairs of the Jogapith, seeing that everything's in order, puja is going. It's very difficult to keep any pujari there. No one wanted to stay. There's very austere situation. But he took upon himself even more austerities. He would go on. He just lived in a little hut that he constructed for himself, and he just chant day and night, whether it was hot, whether it was cold, whether it was raining. During Chaturmas, he would follow strictly all in the. You can follow Chaturmasya at different levels, but he followed it in the most difficult level. He would perform this Chandrayana Vrata, that on the first day of the moon in the Shukla Paksha or the Gaura Paksha, the bright half, the first day you can take one mouthful of food. That's just havishana, which means rice cooked with dal and nothing else. No salt, no ghee, no spices. And you have to eat it go grass. That means you eat it in the manner of a cow. That means you eat it from the ground. You put it on the ground, you lean down, and as much as you can take one time while you're down, that's on the first day. On the second day, you can go down 2 times. On the third day, you can go up to 15 times doing that. And then again it comes back 15, 14, 13, so like that. He was following that. And on Ekadashi, of course, he was fasting fully. So he was following that. Severe austerity. Srila Prabhupada said he performed great austerities to found this Gauriya Math. Some people who visited Navadvip on pilgrimage, Bengalis visiting the birthplace of Caitanya Mahaprabhu, they knew that it was said that there were 2 birthplaces on the other side of the river. These 2 so-called birthplaces. But some people knew that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had also found another he'd established the actual birthplace in Mayapur. So some people would go and visit, and some Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would speak to them. They were impressed by this sadhu. In Navadvip, to visit the temples, you had to pay before you entered. But here, you could come, and not only did you not have to pay, but you'd get spiritual knowledge. This person is quite different to the Jata Gosais, the caste Goswamis on the other side, who they want your money. That's what they want. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he wants your soul, and then no one speaks to uplift you, but there he would speak and go on for hours. And what is his insights and his realizations are not just intellectual, pushing people to surrender to Krishna. So gradually some people, they gathered round him and became his disciples. He started initiating in 1906. Gaura Das Babaji was living on the other side of the river, his guru, but he started accepting disciples. In 1911, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was asked to address a meeting in Medinipur district of West Bengal, which was called because Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had started some kind of preaching on one principle which was not at all appreciated by the Vaishnav orthodoxy. They were preaching, what were they preaching? Jare, Kiba Vipra Kiba Nyasi Shudra Kene No Aj Krishna Tattaveta Shri Guru Hoy. Anyone can be a guru if they know the science of Krishna. They may be a Shudra, they may be a sannyasi. In other words, you don't have to be a Vaishnava Grihasta in a family from Nityananda, Advaita, family line following on from Gadadha, who himself was a lifelong brahmachari, but there's it's called the Gadadha Paribha, Narottam Paribha. You don't have to, it's not a job of a caste. Just like the potter's son becomes a potter, the barber's son becomes a barber. So the guru's son becomes a guru. But it's not like that. But Thakur was preaching against that. So there was a big debate, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur was supposed to go. He was enacting the pastime of being bedridden with rheumatism. He also may not have wanted to go because the chairman of the meeting was his initiating guru, Bipin Bihari Goswami, who, being a member of the Nityananda Vangsha, took the line that you have to be in a guru family to be a guru. So the debate came up, and Siddhanta Saraswati drafted some notes. He read that Bhaktivinoda Thakur asked Siddhanta Saraswati to go and address this meeting on his behalf. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was expected to speak at that meeting on behalf of the pure Vaishnavas, as opposed to the orthodox Vaishnavas. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, unable to go, sent Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati instead. And Saraswati Thakur drafted an essay. He read it to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who congratulated him that you are truly Saraswati. He gave and that you will give the light of Vaishnavism to the world, of pure Vaishnavism. So that essay which Siddhanta Saraswati wrote, he read it out at that meeting at Baligai, the village Baligai where the meeting was called. And later on, he expanded that essay, and it was published as a book which is known in short as Brahmana O Vaishnava, Brahmana and Vaishnava, although the actual title is much longer. So in the meeting, first of all, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he gave so many shlokas from Shastra praising the Brahmanas. And the caste Brahmanas who were in his opposition, they were very happy to hear this. They themselves didn't know so many quotes from Shastra which he gave. So it seemed like Siddhanta Saraswati, who was supposed to be in opposition to them, was upholding their position. They're very happy. But then, after doing that for several hours, he started to establish on the basis of Shastra who actually is a Brahmana. And they didn't like it. Yasya yal lakshanam proktam pungso van avibhyanjakam yadanyatrapi drishyeta tat Diva. Tat Viniryeta. Diranya Drapi Drishyeta Tat Tain Iva Vinirdishat. That's it. For instance, this verse from Bhagavatam saying, giving the qualities of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras, and saying that even if people are not born in a family like this, if they have such qualities, they may be accepted as Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishyas, or Shudra according to their qualities. So the victory went to the Shuddha Vaishnavas headed by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. There were other speakers also. And it's not only, some from Vaishnava families supported the position that anyone can initiate if they're actually qualified. Especially Gopi Balapur Vishvambarananda, not Vishvambarananda, Vishvambarananda of Gopi Balapur, although they have a family of gurus, they were initiating son, father, but and also from Madhusudan Goswami, from Radharaman Gera of Vrindavan. So they supported this position. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati gave the knockout speech, and then everyone rushed toward him to take the dust from his lotus feet, which he was horrified. He never wanted anyone to touch his feet. But the police, many police had been sent there to control the crowds, and they were afraid it might turn violent. It was a very tense issue. So they took Siddhanta Saraswati. The crowds wanted to touch his feet, and he was completely against it. And it was just like a riot. So they took him inside a room, locked the door, forcefully put his feet in a tub against his protest, poured water on it, and then came out and mixed up with other water and sprinkled it to everyone. So to avoid a riot, because everyone was rushing, all the huge crowds there rushing for the dust of his lotus feet. So that was a great success. That was in September 1911. Later in that same year, he addressed a public meeting. There were challenges from the Smarta community, or that Caitanya Mahaprabhu is not Bhagavan. There are no mantras in Shastra glorifying him, and he's in Navadvip. He addressed a meeting and smashed the opposition. So he was doing his Shatakoti Nama Jagya. That started in 1905 and finished in 1914. It was 7 years into that. He fasted for 4 days at the Kashim Bazar Samilani. Then after that, he was, he said himself that he was feeling somewhat depressed, that how is he going? He has the order to preach, but he has no manpower, no money, he has nothing, and he feels he doesn't have the wherewithal to do it. So he was feeling somewhat depressed. He had been writing a commentary on Upadesh Amrita, but he just stopped. He was feeling, enacting the pastime, being depressed. Then one night in a dream, the Panchatattva and all the principal associates of Caitanya Mahaprabhu, all the previous acharyas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Gaura Das Bhakti, they'd all passed away. And they came and appeared in his dream and said, "Don't worry, we're with you. All manpower, money, everything you need, all intelligence, we're going to give it to you. You preach, preach, preach." He also found a little scrap of paper, something torn from a printed edition of Chaitanya Charitamrita, just in a remote place where there are hardly any people. From Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instruction to Sanatana Goswami to renovate the lost places of pilgrimage and preach the truths of bhakti, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur took that as an instruction to himself. So these kind of amazing things were just happening all the time in his life. There's so many things. When Gaura Das Babaji Maharaj passed away, the local Babajis, they all wanted to take his transcendental form and make the samadhi. And they said, I'm the best Babaji, you all, I'm the best Babaji. No, I'm the best Babaji. I should take his body, because they wanted the prestige of having his transcendental form in samadhi in their property, so many people would come, it would increase their own prestige and their income also. And Siddhanta Saraswati, he got the news. Kunja Bihari went to Mayapur to bring him. It was in the rainy season, difficult to cross the river. But he came, he was wearing a green shawl. He would wear a green shawl, use green ink, everything. Because green, the color of separation. He was absorbed in that. He wanted to take, and then they said, "Oh, you can't. You're not a Babaji. Like we're Babajis. You're not. And we're all senior." And Siddhanta Saraswati, speaking to them all, said that I may not have been initiated as a Babaji like you, but by the grace of my Guru Dev, of whom I'm the only disciple, I am not a debauchee like many people who claim themselves to be Babajis. So I'm also a lifelong brahmachari, and I'm willing that any of you can take this form of Gaur Kishore and worship that. But you have to fill this condition. Anyone who within the last year has not had illicit sex. For a Babaji, any sex is illicit sex. Then you can take this body. Now the police chief of Navadvip was there, because he was apprehending there could be some problem. Often sadhus, when they disagree, they get into fights. It's not unknown. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, but if any of you take this body, not fulfilling this condition, you will be absolutely ruined. And the police chief there said, well, how will you know? How will you ascertain? Anyone can just come and take. He said, I will take their word for it. But if they take this body and they're not following this condition, they will be ruined. No one came forward. So then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, so anyone within the last 6 months has not had illicit sex, you can take this form. No one came. He came down to 3 months, 1 month, 1 week, 3 days. They were all walking slowly, quietly, walking away. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur took his form. But even then, due to some politics, he had to make the samadhi in Navadvip. And then there's another whole story, how the Ganga flooded, and then it was the form of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji was lost because there was a flood, and then when all the land moves when the Ganga floods. When she recedes, then the course of the Ganga changes, and you can't tell what was what and where was where before. So Gaur Kishore Das Babaji. There's so many things. There's no time. So many. I didn't even get up to his sannyas yet. I mean, his real preaching leela has been. How can you say so many things? So I'm just trying to make the point here that so many amazing things happened in his life because he was so bold to preach and fully committed to Krishna. These kind of things, they just don't happen to ordinary people, and just on and on throughout his life. Extraordinary personality. It's just amazing that we can be connected with him. Yeah, but Gaur Kishore had said that when I die, I want my body dragged through the streets of Navadvip. But Siddhanta Saraswati forbade them. You don't even touch his body. If you have touched a woman in the last 1 year, don't you dare to even touch his body. They didn't dare. Because they knew that these are all the very highly esteemed Babajis. They knew that Siddhanta Saraswati was a real brahmachari, and if he said that they were going to be ruined if they took the body of Gaur Kishore, then they knew they were going to be in trouble. They had that much faith in the laws of karma. They didn't dare. So he was writing. He learned from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He was trained from a young age in proofreading, how to operate the press. It's not the kind of thing you expect from a sadhu, how to operate a press. He knew everything about the printing press. If it went wrong, he could repair it. He worshipped the printing press as being fully spiritual when used in the service of Krishna. Both in the Bhag Bazaar in Gaura Math, in the Bhag Bazaar in Gaura Math, the showpiece temple, which became the subject of so much contention later on, he had the printing press established not directly in front, directly in front of the deities, but there's a huge Nat Mandir, or what you call a mandapam, you'd call that. There's a big Nat Mandir, and then there's another area behind that, which was, so in the view of the deities there was the printing press. He also established a press for Oriya publication, just next to the temple, certainly within hearing range of the deities. So he considered the printing press, to be so important. Srila Prabhupada said that I learned everything about Vaishnavism from my father. From Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the main thing I learned was the importance of books. If you ever get money, print books. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur told Abhay Charan Aravinda Das. He told him that. He confided to him that we got this palace, this palatial temple in Bhag Bazaar, but there's so much fighting over who will have the best room, this room, that room. He said, I think it's better to rip the temple to pieces and sell the bricks and use money for what? For feeding the poor? No. That's what, oh my God, people would say. You break down the temples and feed the poor. But he said, you break down the temple and you print books. Even at the time of establishing that temple at Bhag Bazaar, this was a major step forward, you could say, for the Gauriya Math, or at least it appeared to be. Even at that time, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, in the speech that he gave on that day, at the inauguration of the temple in Bhag Bazaar, he said that the real temple we have to build is the temple of books, of knowledge. This is that we have to construct. This is the most important thing, to have many books. He said that neophyte devotees, they're more interested in opening many temples and making many followers. But he said advanced devotees, they're more interested in writing, publishing, and distributing books. He considered that more important than initiating many devotees. Which, if you think about it, might seem strange, because the whole idea of opening temples, and especially of writing books, is to bring people to Krishna consciousness. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he thought that books, and by books I don't mean coloring books or children's books, story books. For him, books mean Siddhanta. So to establish this Siddhanta, if Bhaktisiddhanta is established, everything else will follow from that. And even if you bring many people and you get them chanting and this and that, if they don't have the Siddhanta, then it's just a mess, as we often see in our society today. That people may come and they're chanting, and no doubt they're benefited, but without proper understanding of this Siddhanta, then real Krishna consciousness is not established. So even if there are many people coming and they're all college graduates and they're all nicely behaved and they distribute midday meals and all this kind of thing, but even if they're very nice sadhus, But unless the Siddhanta is properly established, the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is not fulfilled. He put so much emphasis on books. He spent so much time. He was also busy traveling and preaching. He traveled extensively. He made sannyasis. He called the printing press the Brihat Mridanga, the big Mridanga. There's the khol, or the drum used in Sankirtan. That is the paraphernalia of Caitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan room, just like the paraphernalia of Krishna. He has his bow, his sword, his club. He has all his weapons. His Sudarshan, of course, Sudarshan chakra. So his flute for Vraja Leela. So his flute comes as the mridanga in the Leela of Caitanya Mahaprabhu. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that the bigger mridanga is the printing press, because this mridanga can be heard a short distance, but the books will go everywhere. They can go all over the world. And he called his sannyasis Jivanta Mridanga, living mridangas. They were supposed to, their main thing, they were supposed to speak. They were supposed to be, the disciple is supposed to be an expansion of the guru, and especially the sannyasi. Their main business is to speak the message of Bhaktisiddhanta. Okay, we'll sing now the Gurudev Kripa Bindu Diya.